There's a moment most parents will never admit to. You walk into your kid's room at night. You stand over them while they sleep. You feel so much love you can barely breathe. And then, in the exact same instant, your mind flashes to a car wreck, an empty car seat on the side of the highway, a phone call you'll never recover from. Brené Brown studied this for over a decade. She found that around 80% of parents do it. We're not crazy. We're rehearsing tragedy. And it is quietly hollowing out the best parts of our lives in ways most of us will never notice. If that hit close to home, if you've ever caught yourself doing it, stay with me, because that one tiny private moment in the middle of the night is the exact thing this book is about. Not parenting, not children, but what every single one of us does when we feel something so good that it scares us. Brené Brown is a research professor who has spent the last 2 decades studying the emotions most people will do anything to avoid. Shame, fear, vulnerability. She has interviewed thousands of people, men, women, executives, soldiers, parents, teenagers, and out of all that data, one finding kept showing up over and over again. The people who lived the fullest, richest, most connected lives, the people she called wholehearted, were not the strongest. They were not the most successful. They were not the people who seemed to have it all figured out. They were the people who had stopped trying to look bulletproof. The people who had walked into the hardest moments of their lives without armor. The book is called Daring Greatly, and the central idea is this: vulnerability is not weakness. Vulnerability is the most accurate measure of courage we have. Over the next hour, I'll walk you through every key idea in the book. We'll start with a quote from 1910 that gave Brown the title. We'll look at why our culture is hooked on a feeling of never being enough. We'll talk about what vulnerability actually is, and the 4 myths most of us believe about it. We'll go into the real enemy underneath all of it, which is shame. We'll inventory the armor we wear to protect ourselves and the staggering price we pay for wearing it. And by the end, we'll talk about what it means to be the kind of parent, partner, leader, and friend the people in your life actually need. So let's start at the arena. Section 1. The arena. In April of 1910, Theodore Roosevelt walked onto a stage at the Sorbonne in Paris and delivered a speech that would echo for the next 100 years. He had just finished his 2nd term as president. He was tired. He was being criticized from every direction by people who had never held the office, and he gave a speech about what it actually costs to do anything that matters. The speech was called Citizenship in a Republic. But that's not the name most people know it by. Most people know it by the name of the passage that made it famous: The Man in the Arena. Here is what Roosevelt said: "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows the great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly." Brené Brown read that quote for the first time, and something clicked. She had been studying vulnerability for years, doing the research, interviewing thousands of people, writing academic papers no one outside her field would ever read. And the second she read Roosevelt's words, she realized that what he was describing, the man in the arena, marred by dust and blood, striving valiantly, daring greatly, was the exact thing her data kept circling. He wasn't describing courage the way we usually think about it. He wasn't describing fearlessness. He wasn't describing the strong, silent type who never flinches. He was describing something messier and more honest. He was describing what it costs to actually show up. Now here's where Brown's story gets uncomfortable. Because at the time she read that quote, she had just done something that terrified her more than anything she had ever done in her professional life. She had given a TED Talk in 2010. In a small auditorium in Houston, she stood on a little red carpet and tried to explain her research on vulnerability to a room of about 500 people. She made jokes, she told stories, And toward the end, she said out loud, into a microphone, in front of a live audience and a camera, quote, "I had a breakdown. My therapist calls it a spiritual awakening. I call it a breakdown." She walked off the stage thinking, well, that's the end of my academic career. What she didn't know was that the talk would go online, and then it would go viral, and then it would be watched by 5 million people, and then 50 million, and eventually by hundreds of millions more. Brown describes what came next as a vulnerability hangover. She stayed in her house for 3 days. She wouldn't answer her phone. She refreshed the comment section the way you keep checking a wound that hasn't stopped bleeding. She read every cruel thing strangers said about her body, her voice, her hair, her research. She lay on the couch watching old reruns of a sitcom on repeat, eating peanut butter straight out of the jar. And she seriously wondered whether she could fake her own death and move to a small town in Mexico. And somewhere in the middle of all that, she opened a book she had been meaning to read. And she came across the Roosevelt quote, "It is not the critic who counts." It hit her like a wave. She had been spending 3 days reading every word of the critics, refreshing the comments, studying the people who weren't in the arena, the ones who hadn't done anything, the ones who could sit safely behind a screen and dismantle another person's entire effort with a single sentence. And she realized something that changed her life. The people she actually loved, her husband Steve, her therapist Diana, her closest friends, were not in the bleachers. They had never been in the bleachers. They were in the arena with her. They knew she was tired. They knew she was scared. They had watched her wad up the map of her own theories and shove it in the kitchen junk drawer more than once. And they loved her anyway. The critics had never been the people who counted. She just hadn't been able to see that until she was on the floor. That is where this book starts. With the recognition that every single one of us, every day in 1,000 small ways, is choosing between 2 seats. There is a seat in the stands. It is comfortable. It is safe. It does not require us to risk anything. We can heckle the people on the field. We can roll our eyes at the people who tried something and failed. We can stay clean. And there is a seat in the arena. It is exposed. It is uncertain. It guarantees we will fall down at some point. It guarantees we will be criticized by people who never had the guts to try what we are trying. It guarantees pain, but it is the only seat where anything real ever happens. So here is a question I want you to sit with as we go through the next hour together. Where in your own life are you in the bleachers right now? What is the dream, the conversation, the relationship, the project, the apology, the phone call you have been watching from the stands because you are terrified to step out onto the field? Because the cost of the bleachers is invisible. It does not show up on a bank statement. It will not give you a heart attack at 50. But it is, quietly, the most expensive thing you will ever pay for. And by the time you realize what it cost you, the game is usually over. To dare greatly is to step into the arena. And before we can do that, we first have to understand the thing that has been keeping us out of it. Section 2. The scarcity trap. If you have ever felt, in the middle of an otherwise ordinary day, a sudden wave of inadequacy, the feeling that you are not doing enough, earning enough, being enough, achieving enough, parenting well enough, being a good enough partner, Brené Brown wants you to know something. You are not having a personal failure, you are having a cultural one. A few years ago, Brown was speaking in front of about 1,000 people. Someone in the audience raised their hand and asked a question that comes up at almost every event she does. The question was, what is wrong with kids today? Why does everyone think they're so special? What is turning everyone into narcissists? And without really thinking about it, Brown answered with a phrase she had grown up hearing in Texas. She said, "You can't swing a cat without hitting a narcissist." She immediately regretted it, not because of the message, but because, as it turned out, more than a few people in the audience pictured her literally swinging a cat. She got a flood of emails. Animal lovers wrote in. People who knew her work on empathy and connection wrote in. She had to look up the origin of the expression, which, by the way, has nothing to do with cats. It comes from the British Navy. It refers to how hard it was to use a cat-o'-nine-tails whip in the tight quarters of a ship. So in the end, the expression was either about animal cruelty or about flogging sailors. Brown calls this one of her finer moments as a public speaker. But here is why she tells the story. Because the conversation about narcissism, the conversation we are all having, all the time, in our offices, in our families, and the comment sections of every social media post, is a perfect example of how we keep missing the actual point. When most people use the word narcissist today, they mean someone who is arrogant, self-absorbed, entitled, obsessed with attention, and the standard cultural response is, these people need to be cut down to size. They need to be reminded that they are not special. They need to get over themselves. But Brown has spent over a decade studying the actual roots of this behavior. And what she has found is that every single level of severity in narcissism, from mild self-importance all the way to a full personality disorder, sits on top of one thing: shame. Not arrogance, not entitlement. Shame, the fear of being ordinary. The fear that you are not and never will be special enough to matter, which means if shame is the root, then shaming people for their narcissism is not the cure. It is gasoline on the fire. And here is why this matters for every single one of us, not just for the people we are quick to label. Because we live in a culture that has quietly decided on a mass scale that being ordinary is the worst possible fate a person could have. We are surrounded, every minute of every day, by messages that an ordinary life is a meaningless life. That if you are not extraordinary, not famous, not at the top, not viral, you are nobody. A teenager scrolling on their phone absorbs this in about 5 minutes. An adult sitting in a meeting learns it every time someone younger gets promoted ahead of them. A new parent learns it every time they open an app and see another family's vacation photos. This is what Brown calls scarcity culture, the pervasive, never-resting whisper of never enough. I am not thin enough. I am not rich enough. I am not successful enough. I am not powerful enough. I am not certain enough. I am not safe enough. I am not extraordinary enough. Never enough. She did an exercise once with a group. She asked them, just shout it out, never blank enough. What goes in that blank for you? And the answers came in like rapid fire. Never thin enough. Never rich enough. Never safe enough. Never certain enough. Never perfect enough. Never extraordinary enough. She kept doing the exercise. Different rooms, different cities, different countries. The answers were always almost identical. The list of things we feel we are not enough of is apparently the same in Houston as it is in London as it is in Sydney. Here is the question that comes next. What does scarcity actually do to a person? What does it do to a family, a workplace, a school, a country? According to the research, it does 3 things. The first is shame, the constant background hum of not measuring up. The second is comparison. We stop running our own race and start running someone else's. We measure our worth against a magazine cover, a stranger's career, an Instagram feed that has been curated for our envy. And the third, which is the most damaging, is disengagement. Because if we have already decided we can't measure up, then why try? Why volunteer the idea in the meeting? Why apply for the job? Why ask the person out? Why start the business? The voice in our head has already told us we don't have what it takes. So we sit down and stop reaching. Here is the part of the research that surprised even Brown. She thought the opposite of scarcity was abundance, more than enough, a cup running over. But that is not what the data showed. The opposite of scarcity is not abundance. The opposite of scarcity is enough. It is a small word. But sit with it for a moment. Enough. I am enough. What I am doing is enough. The way I love my family is enough. The work I am putting into my life is enough. That is what Brown calls wholeheartedness. And it is not a feeling that finally arrives one day when the circumstances all line up. It is a practice. It is something you have to choose to believe in the middle of a culture that is constantly telling you the opposite. And the doorway into that practice, the only doorway Brown could find in 12 years of research, is vulnerability, which sounds, on the face of it, like the worst possible solution. Because most of us, when we hear the word vulnerability, hear the word weakness. We hear something fragile, something embarrassing, something we would rather keep hidden under several layers of clothing. So before we can go any further, we need to clear up what vulnerability actually is, because almost everything most of us think we know about it is wrong. Section 3. What vulnerability actually is. Quick exercise. Before I say anything else, ask yourself, what is the first image that pops into your head when you hear the word vulnerable? For most people, the image is some version of being exposed, standing naked in a public place, being attacked while your back is turned, a small animal cornered by a predator, a target painted on someone's chest. When Brown asked thousands of research participants what vulnerability felt like, the most common single word she got back was naked. People said it felt like being naked on stage and hoping for applause rather than laughter. Like the nightmare where you suddenly realize you were at the airport and you forgot your clothes. But naked was just one answer. Some of the others, in people's exact words, were these. Vulnerability is taking off the mask and hoping the real you is not too disappointing. Vulnerability is going out on a limb, a very, very high limb. Vulnerability is taking the first step toward what you fear the most. Vulnerability feels like a lump in your throat and a knot in your chest. Vulnerability is the time between hearing a gunshot and waiting to see if you have been hit. Vulnerability is the terrifying moment on a roller coaster when you are about to tip over the edge. Read those again in your head. Every single one of them is a description of fear, of exposure, of being on the verge of getting hurt, and every single one of them is also a description of being alive. That is the discovery Brown made that took her over a decade to put into words. Vulnerability is not a kind of weakness. Vulnerability is the feeling we get whenever we are about to do anything that actually matters. Her formal definition is 3 words long. Vulnerability is uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. Now hold that definition up against the things she also asked people about. She would say to a research participant, "Finish this sentence for me. Vulnerability is blank." And the answers came in by the thousand. Vulnerability is sharing an unpopular opinion, standing up for myself, asking for help, saying no, starting my own business, initiating sex with my husband, hearing how much my son wants to make first chair in the orchestra, and encouraging him while knowing it is probably not going to happen, calling a friend whose child just died, the first date after my divorce, saying I love you first and not knowing if I am going to be loved back, getting pregnant after 3 miscarriages, waiting for the biopsy to come back, telling my CEO that we won't make payroll next month, asking for forgiveness, having faith. Do those sound like weaknesses to you? Does sitting with a grieving friend sound like weakness? Does telling someone you love them first sound like weakness? Does asking for forgiveness sound like weakness? No. Those are the bravest things a human being ever does, and every single one of them is vulnerable. Brown tells a story in the book about a moment from her own life that she calls the turning point. She and her husband Steve were lying on the floor of their living room watching their daughter Ellen, who was a little girl at the time. Ellen was doing one of those wild, uninhibited little kid dances, arms flailing, knees slapping, tumbling around, completely unbothered by anyone watching. Brown looked over at Steve and said something quietly. She said, "Isn't it amazing how I love her even more for being that goofy, that uninhibited, that free? Can you imagine knowing you were loved like that?" Steve looked at her, and he said, "I love you exactly like that." She writes that, in that moment, it had simply never occurred to her, in her entire adult life, that you could be loved for your vulnerabilities. Not despite them, for them. She had spent her whole life believing that love was something you earned by being more competent, more polished, more in control, more bulletproof. And here was the person who loved her most telling her, "No, I love you exactly when you are at your goofiest, your most uninhibited, your most uncertain, because that is when you are most you." That is what vulnerability actually is. It is the willingness to let someone love you, see you, hire you, fire you, kiss you, reject you, work with you, follow you, as the real, unprotected, uncertain version of yourself, not the carefully edited version. Now let's go through the 4 myths most of us have absorbed about what vulnerability is. Because if you have ever resisted being more open with someone in your life, the resistance probably falls into one of these 4 buckets. Myth 1. Vulnerability is weakness. This is the most common myth and the most dangerous. We have all heard a version of it. Don't be weak. Suck it up. Don't show them you're hurt. Real men don't cry. Real leaders don't doubt themselves. Strong women hold it together. Brown's response, after over a decade of data, is simple. To feel is to be vulnerable. So if you believe vulnerability is weakness, what you are actually saying is that feeling itself is weakness, which means you have decided that love is weakness, that joy is weakness, that hope is weakness, that you would rather feel nothing than feel something that might cost you. That is not strength. That is exhaustion in disguise. Myth 2. I don't do vulnerability. This is the myth Brown personally fought hardest. The belief that some of us, through some combination of grit, intelligence, or personality, have somehow opted out of the human experience of vulnerability. We've evolved past it. It happens to other people. Softer people. The data says no. The only people who reported never feeling vulnerable in any of Brown's research were people you would not want to spend a long car ride with. Because choosing not to feel vulnerability does not mean you have escaped it. It means you have walled off the part of yourself that can feel anything at all. Myth 3. Vulnerability is letting it all hang out. Some people swing the other way. They've heard that vulnerability is good, and they take it to mean spill everything, to everyone, all the time. Total emotional transparency. No filter. That's not vulnerability either. That's what Brown calls floodlighting, and it usually is not connection. It is often a desperate, unconscious bid for sympathy, or shock, or attention. Real vulnerability has boundaries. It involves sharing something true with someone who has actually earned the right to hear it. Myth 4. We can do it alone. This is the American myth. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Don't rely on anyone. Need is weakness. Asking for help is failure. But every piece of research Brown has ever done says the same thing. The people who live the most courageous lives are the people who have the deepest relationships, who ask for help when they need it, who say, I don't know, who say, I'm scared, who say, I need you. Vulnerability is not weakness. Vulnerability is not letting it all hang out. Vulnerability is not something only certain people experience. Vulnerability is not something we are supposed to handle alone. Vulnerability is the willingness to show up and be seen, uncertain, risky, exposed, when there is no guarantee of how it will go. And here is the line from the book I want you to take with you into the rest of your day. Vulnerability is the birthplace of love, belonging, joy, courage, empathy, accountability, and creativity. It is the source. It is not the obstacle to the things you want most. It is the path to them. But there is one thing standing between you and that path. One thing that, more than anything else, will whisper in your ear and convince you not to take it. And it is the thing we are going to look at next. Section 4. The real enemy. Shame. A few years ago, Brené Brown had just finished giving a talk on wholehearted families. The applause had died down, the lights had come up, and the people in the front row were beginning to filter toward the stage. A man approached her. He was tall. He looked a little uncomfortable. He stuck out his hand and said, I just want to say thank you. She shook his hand. He looked down at the floor for a second. He took a deep breath, and then he said something Brown would never forget. He said, I have to tell you, I really didn't want to come tonight. I tried to get out of it, but my wife made me. Brown laughed and said, yeah, I get that a lot. He said, I couldn't understand why she was so excited. I told her there was no worse way to spend a Thursday night than listening to a shame researcher. Then he paused, and he asked her a strange question. He said, are you a Harry Potter fan? She stalled, because she could not figure out where this was going. She said, yes, actually, huge fan. Read all the books more than once. Watched all the movies. Why? He said, I had a picture of you in my head before I got here. I thought you were going to be like Snape. The dark, intimidating professor. I thought you would be wearing all black and talking in a deep, haunting voice like the world was ending. She laughed so hard she nearly spit out the water she was drinking. She told him that actually Snape was one of her favorite characters. She did not mention that her keychain at that exact moment, sitting in her purse under the podium, was a tiny Lego Snape figurine. But then his face got serious, and he said, "What you were talking about up there really made sense to me, especially the part about us being so afraid of the dark stuff. I was shamed a lot growing up, and I have 3 kids. I do not want to do to them what was done to me. I want them to know they are enough. I want them to be able to talk to me about the hard things." He paused, and then he asked the question that became the seed of an entire chapter of this book. He said, "I'm pretty bad at vulnerability, but I'm really good at shame. Is getting past shame necessary for getting to vulnerability?" Brown's answer was yes. The entire answer to the question of how to dare greatly turns on understanding shame, because shame is the single thing, more than anything else, that stops us from being seen. By the end of their conversation, the man hugged her. He thanked her again. He walked away. And just before he hit the bottom of the stairs, he turned back and said, "You may not be Snape, but you are a damn good defense against the dark arts teacher." So let's do some defense against the dark arts. First, the single most important distinction in the entire book: the difference between shame and guilt. Almost no one in our culture gets this right. The 2 words are used interchangeably. We say "I feel guilty" when we mean "I feel ashamed," and vice versa, but they are completely different emotions. They produce completely different behaviors, and mixing them up will keep you stuck for your entire life. Here is the distinction. Guilt is "I did something bad." Shame is "I am bad." Read those 2 sentences again in your head. I did something bad. I am bad. Guilt is about behavior. Shame is about identity. Guilt says, "This thing I did was inconsistent with who I want to be." Shame says, "This thing I did proves I am fundamentally flawed as a person." Brown's 20 years of research has come to one consistent finding on this. Guilt is healthy. Shame is corrosive. Guilt is what makes you apologize when you have hurt someone. Guilt is what motivates you to do better. Guilt is what aligns your behavior with your values. Guilt is, in the research literature, adaptive. Shame does the opposite. Shame does not make you do better. Shame makes you hide. Shame makes you addicted. Shame makes you violent. Shame makes you lash out at the people closest to you. Shame is the engine running underneath almost every form of human destruction. Think about that. The voice in your head that whispers, "You are a bad parent. You are a bad partner. You are a fraud. You are a failure. You do not deserve good things." That voice does not make you better. That voice destroys you, and it destroys the people around you. Because what we cannot tolerate in ourselves, we cannot tolerate in anyone else either. So what is shame actually for? What is it doing in our heads? Brown defines shame in one sentence. Shame is the intensely painful feeling that we are unworthy of love and belonging. Notice what is hidden inside that definition. Shame is, at its core, the fear of disconnection. The fear that if people really saw us, if they knew what we had done, what we had thought, what we secretly believed about ourselves, they would walk away. They would withdraw their love. We would be left alone. That is why shame is so powerful. Because in our deepest wiring, we are social animals. We are built for connection. Being cut off from the tribe was, for our ancestors, a death sentence. So our nervous system treats the fear of disconnection like a fear of death, which is why shame, when it really hits, can feel like dying. Here is the part that surprised even Brown. Shame is universal. Every single human being on this planet who is not a sociopath experiences shame. The only people who have ever told Brown they don't feel shame are people who are incapable of human empathy. So if you are sitting there right now feeling slightly embarrassed that you are listening to a video that talks about shame, congratulations, you are a healthy, empathetic human being. Welcome to the club. But here is the catch. Shame is universal, and yet we are all terrified to talk about it, which leads to one of Brown's most quoted lines from the book. Shame derives its power from being unspeakable. The less we talk about it, the more we have it. The more we hide it, the larger it grows. Shame is like a fungus. It cannot survive in light. Brown identifies 3 things that shame needs in order to grow. 3 ingredients. Without them, shame starves. The first is secrecy. The thing you swore you would never tell anyone, the mistake you have not been able to forgive yourself for, the version of yourself you keep hidden from everyone in your life. The second is silence. The shame you sit with, alone, in the middle of the night, that you have never said out loud to another human being. And the third is judgment, the internal voice and the external culture that tells you that what you have done, what you have felt, what you are, makes you less than other people. Secrecy, silence, judgment. Those are the 3 legs of the stool that holds shame in place. So what dismantles it? The opposite. Story, connection, empathy. When you say the thing out loud to one trusted person and they look at you and they do not flinch and they do not judge, something almost miraculous happens. The shame begins to lose its grip, because it turns out the thing you thought made you a monster also lives in some form inside the person sitting across from you. They have their own version of it, and just naming it out loud to another human being who responds with empathy robs it of its power. There is a line from the Harry Potter books that Brown loves. In the story, Sirius Black is trying to comfort Harry, who has been worried that something is wrong with him because he sometimes feels rage and darkness. And Sirius says to him, "Listen to me, Harry. You're not a bad person. You're a very good person who bad things have happened to. The world isn't split into good people and Death Eaters. We've all got both light and dark inside us. What matters is the part we choose to act on. That's who we really are. We have all got both light and dark inside us. That is the truth shame does not want you to know. Because the moment you accept it, shame loses its weapon." One more thing about shame before we move on. Brown's research found that shame, while universal, looks completely different in men and women. For women, the shame web is a tangle of impossible, often contradictory expectations. Be perfect, but don't try too hard. Be ambitious, but don't be intimidating. Be a great mother, but also crush it at work. Be beautiful, but not in a way that anyone notices. Be available, but not needy. Be confident, but humble. Stay thin, look young, never age. One step outside any of those expectations, and the web tightens around you. For men, the shame message is shorter and more brutal. Do not be perceived as weak. That is the whole rule. Do not cry. Do not ask for help. Do not admit fear. Do not show emotion that isn't anger. The cost of stepping outside that rule for many men is being seen as less of a man. And that is, in our culture, still one of the most punishing things that can happen to a person. Both versions of the shame web are exhausting. Both versions are silently destroying relationships, mental health, and lives. And both versions can only be dismantled by the same thing, telling the truth to someone who has earned the right to hear it. Which brings us, finally, to the thing we put up to protect ourselves from all this. The shields, the armor, the custom-built suits we have been wearing since we were children, and the surprising price they have been quietly charging us for protection they do not actually provide. Section 5. The armor we wear. Picture a middle school cafeteria. 11, 12, 13-year-olds. The age when most of us first started putting on armor. At that age, the armor is still awkward. It does not fit yet. You can see kids trying it on right in front of you. The boy who suddenly decides he's too cool to care, the girl who can't admit she wants to be invited to the dance, the kid who hides his entire face inside the hood of his sweatshirt. Brown calls this the starting line for the race to the armory. Because the armor we put on at 12 does not go away when we grow up, it just gets harder to see. By the time we are adults, the armor has molded to our shape. It is invisible. It is, in some cases, the only version of ourselves we can remember. Brown interviewed hundreds of people who said some version of, "I can't take the mask off now. I don't know what is underneath. My partner has never seen the real me. I'm not sure who I am anymore." Here is the cruelest thing about adult armor. It does not protect us from the thing we are afraid of. It guarantees the thing we are afraid of. We put it on to keep from being hurt. We put it on to keep from being seen as weak. We put it on to keep from being judged. And in doing so, we ensure that no one ever really knows us. No one ever really loves us for who we are. And the inner loneliness gets quieter and louder at the same time. Brown identifies 3 pieces of armor that almost every single person on the planet wears. She calls them the common vulnerability arsenal. Let's go through each one. Because the second you can see your own armor, you can decide whether you want to keep wearing it. The first shield is foreboding joy. This is the one we opened the video with. The moment when you are flooded with love or happiness, and instead of feeling it, really feeling it, your mind immediately flashes to disaster. You stand over your sleeping child and picture a phone call from the police. You finally get the promotion you have been waiting on for years, and your first thought is, what's the catch? You fall in love and immediately start cataloging the ways it could end. You go on a family vacation and rehearse the plane crash. You watch your spouse fall asleep next to you and imagine what it would feel like to lose them. About 80% of the parents Brown interviewed admitted to doing this. Most of them had never told anyone before. They were sure they were the only one. They thought there was something dark and twisted in their wiring that they had to hide. There isn't. There is just an entire generation of people who have learned to be afraid of their own joy. One woman in her late 40s told Brown that she had spent her entire life imagining the worst possible thing every time anything good happened. When her daughter got into the college of her dreams, the mother spent the entire summer trying to convince her not to go. It was too far. Something terrible was going to happen. The trip would end in tragedy. The mother said she had crushed her daughter's confidence, ruined the last summer they had together, and could already see the same fear passing into her daughter, who had become afraid to try anything new in case it tempted fate. Another man, in his early 60s, told Brown the other side of this story. He said he used to think the safest way to live was to expect the worst. That way, if it happened, at least you weren't surprised. And if it didn't happen, you were pleasantly relieved. Then his wife was killed in a car accident, and he realized something he had not been prepared for. Expecting the worst had not protected him at all. The grief still came. He had no defense against it, but because he had spent years half-flinching through every good moment they had ever had together, he had also not enjoyed those moments. He had not been fully present for them. The expectation of disaster had robbed him of the marriage itself. His commitment now, to her, is to fully feel every moment of joy as it happens. He just wishes she were still here to share it with him now that he finally knows how. Brown calls foreboding joy a continuum. On one end is rehearsing tragedy. On the other end is what she calls perpetual disappointment. The people who live in perpetual disappointment have decided that it is easier to stay slightly disappointed all the time than to risk being disappointed once. So they preemptively flatten their expectations. They never get excited. They never let themselves really hope. They never let joy in at all. So what's the antidote? What replaces foreboding joy? Gratitude. Not as a vague feeling, as a practice, as a discipline. Every single person Brown interviewed who had learned to lean into joy, to feel it fully without bracing for the disaster, described gratitude as the engine. They had a practice. They wrote it down. They said it out loud. They named the thing they were grateful for in the exact moment they were tempted to flinch into fear. When the love floods in, instead of imagining the catastrophe, you say to yourself, I am so grateful for this moment, right now, exactly as it is. That single sentence is what trains the nervous system to stay in joy instead of running from it. The second shield is perfectionism. This is the one I want you to listen to carefully, because almost everyone misunderstands this. Perfectionism is not the same as healthy striving. It is not high standards. It is not ambition. It is not wanting to do good work. Perfectionism is the belief that if you can just be perfect enough, thin enough, polished enough, productive enough, successful enough, you will never be judged, criticized, or shamed. It is at its core a shame-driven shield. The perfectionist is not trying to be great. The perfectionist is trying to be unreachable, to be so flawless that no one will ever be able to wound them, and it does not work. Brown's research on this is direct. Perfectionism is correlated with depression, anxiety, addiction, life paralysis, and missed opportunities. It is not a path to success. It is a path to being too afraid to ever try. The perfectionist will not start the business until the plan is finished. The plan is never finished. The perfectionist will not send the email until the wording is right. The wording is never right. The perfectionist will not have the hard conversation until they have the perfect script. They never have it. What is the antidote to perfectionism? Self-compassion. The willingness to make something imperfectly and put it into the world anyway. To be loved for who you are, not for how flawless you appear. To say, I am enough, even on the days I fall short. The third shield is numbing. This is the one almost no one wants to talk about, because numbing is the part of the armor most of us spend a lot of money and time on. Numbing is anything we do to take the edge off the discomfort of being human. The glass of wine that becomes two, that becomes a bottle. The hours of mindless scrolling, the constant snacking, the work addiction, the obsession with our phones, the endless busyness, the shows we binge past 2 in the morning so we don't have to lie alone in the dark with our thoughts. None of these things is bad on its own. The problem is when they become the way we avoid feeling anything at all. And here is the part of Brown's research that hit hardest for the people she interviewed. We cannot selectively numb. You cannot say to your nervous system, turn off the anxiety, keep the joy, turn off the grief, keep the love, turn off the fear, keep the wonder. When you numb the dark, you numb the light. When you stop feeling pain, you also stop feeling pleasure. You stop feeling, period, which means the things we use to escape the hard emotions are also quietly robbing us of the good ones. The wine that takes the edge off the bad day also dulls the texture of the good day. The scrolling that distracts you from anxiety also distracts you from the person sitting on the couch next to you. The busyness that protects you from feeling sad also protects you from feeling grateful. The antidote is the opposite of numbing. It is feeling, being willing to sit in the discomfort just for a moment before reaching for the thing that takes it away. It is, in Brown's words, leaning into the sharp edges instead of around them. There is one more piece of armor that does not always make the standard list, but Brown writes about it at length because it shows up everywhere, especially online. She calls it the shield of criticism, cynicism, cool, and cruelty. This is the armor we put on when we see someone else daring greatly. When we see another person take a risk, put their work out into the world, try something new, be enthusiastic, care openly about something, and instead of cheering them on, we feel something stir in us. Discomfort, maybe envy, maybe a small voice that whispers, who do they think they are? And we put them down. We criticize, we mock, we sneer at how much they care. We hide behind cynicism. We pose at being too cool to be moved by anything. Brown's point is that this armor is almost always about us, not about them. When we see cruelty towards someone who is daring greatly, vulnerability is almost always the driver. We are seeing in them the thing we are too afraid to risk in ourselves. And we cannot stand the mirror. Brown writes about how she protects herself from this kind of criticism when it comes at her. She does two things. The first is that she only listens to feedback from people who are also in the arena. If you are sitting in the bleachers heckling, if you have never tried what I am trying, never made what I am making, never risked what I am risking, your opinion of my work is not feedback, it is noise, and I do not have to take it in. The second thing she does is more concrete. She literally carries a small piece of paper in her wallet. On that piece of paper is a short list of names. The names of the people whose opinions of her actually matter. To be on the list, you have to know her real self. You have to love her for her strengths and her struggles. You have to know she still cusses too much and flips people off under the steering wheel sometimes. You have to be what she calls a stretch mark friend, someone whose connection with her has been stretched and pulled and scarred over the years, until it has become a second skin. She says most of us, if we are honest, only have 1 or 2 people who really belong on that list. And that's enough. The challenge, the hard part, is to not give the strangers in the comments more weight than the people on the wallet list. The hard part is to not betray the few people who know your real self for the approval of the many who don't. If you want to dare greatly, this might be the single most practical thing you can do today. Make the list, write the names down, and the next time someone you have never met tries to tell you who you are, look at the list and remember whose voice actually counts. Section 6. Minding the gap at work and in leadership. There is a small framed postcard hanging in Brené Brown's house. It says 3 words, mind the gap. If you have ever ridden the London Underground, you have heard the phrase. It is the warning broadcast over the loudspeaker when the train pulls up to the platform. There is a small gap between the door of the train and the edge of the station. If you do not pay attention, you can fall into it. Mind the gap. Brown uses the phrase as a metaphor for what she believes is the single most important practice for leaders, managers, parents, and teachers. The gap is the space between what we say we value and what we actually do, between the culture we say we have and the culture we actually have, between the words we put on the wall and the way the people inside the building actually treat each other. Almost every organization Brown has ever worked with, every school, every company, every team, every family has a poster on a wall somewhere that lists their values: integrity, respect, innovation, trust, excellence, and almost every organization has a gap. The values on the wall are not the values that actually run the place. The real values are the ones you can see in how people behave when no one is watching, in whose ideas get taken seriously, in how mistakes are handled, in whether anyone ever actually says, "I don't know," or "I was wrong," or "I need help." Here is a question Brown poses to leaders. Are the values your team lives by the same as the values printed on your corporate website? For most leaders, the honest answer is no. There is a gap, and the gap is where disengagement is born. Disengagement is the thing every leader is secretly afraid of. The employee who is showing up but not really there. The team member who used to bring energy and ideas and now just goes through the motions. The student who has stopped raising her hand. The kid who has stopped trying. Disengagement does not happen because people are lazy. Brown is firm on this. Disengagement happens when people feel unseen, when they feel that what they say does not matter, when they feel that risk gets punished and safety gets rewarded, when they realize that the company says it wants innovation but everyone who tried something new and failed got fired. At that point, the smart move, the rational move, is to stop trying, to stop showing up with your full self, to put on the armor and just survive. So how do you close the gap? Brown's answer is the entire point of the book applied to organizations. You have to be willing to lead with vulnerability. Brown interviewed Christine Day, who at the time was the CEO of Lululemon. Day told Brown something she had never said publicly before. She said, "For most of my career, I majored in being right." That phrase stopped Brown in her tracks. Majored in being right. Day said she had been a smart, capable, hard-charging executive who had built her career by being the person in the room who had the best ideas, the sharpest answers, and the most confident takes. She was always right, and she was good at being right. Then she said the shift came when she realized that her job as a leader was not to have the best ideas. Her job was to create the space for everyone else to bring theirs. Her job was not problem-solving. Her job was leading people. She made the shift from controlling to engaging with vulnerability, from the best idea person in the room to the best leader of the people in the room. Here is what happened next. Under her leadership, Lululemon grew from 71 stores to 174. Revenue climbed from $297 million to almost $1 billion. The stock went up about 300%. Brown's point is not that vulnerability is a magic business strategy. Her point is that the kind of culture that produces real results, innovation, trust, ownership, retention, only exists when the people inside it are not constantly using their energy to keep their armor in place. Brown also interviewed Gay Gaddis, the founder of T3, an advertising firm in Austin, Texas. Gaddis started the company in 1989 with $16,000 she had cashed out of an IRA. 23 years later, T3 was the largest advertising agency wholly owned by a woman in the United States. A journalist had told Brown earlier that day that, in his opinion, entrepreneurs could not afford to be vulnerable. There was too much on the line. So when Brown sat down with Gaddis, she opened with that. She said, "A journalist told me entrepreneurs can't afford to be vulnerable. What do you think?" Gaddis smiled, and she said one sentence that should be tattooed on every founder, every leader, every manager who is currently white-knuckling their way through the workday. She said, "When you shut down vulnerability, you shut down opportunity." That's it. That's the entire argument for vulnerability in the workplace in one sentence. Every new idea, every honest conversation, every promotion you ask for, every product you launch, every team you hire, every single one of them is uncertain, risky, and emotionally exposing, which means every single one of them is vulnerable, which means if you have shut down vulnerability in yourself, you have shut down your access to any opportunity that requires you to risk being wrong. So what does vulnerability actually look like at work? It is not crying in meetings. It is not oversharing about your weekend. Brown gives a list in the book of small phrases that, when they show up in a workplace or a family, are the signs of a healthy culture. Listen carefully, because they are deceptively simple. "I don't know. I need help. I'd like to give it a shot. It's important to me. I disagree. Can we talk about it? It didn't work, but I learned a lot. Yes, I did it. Here's what I need. Here's how I feel. I'd like some feedback. What can I do better next time? Can you teach me how to do this? I played a part in that. I accept responsibility. I'm here for you. I want to help. Let's move on. I'm sorry. Thank you." Imagine a workplace where those phrases were normal, where the CEO could say them, where the new hire could say them, where the manager could say them to the team and the team could say them back. That is what daring greatly looks like in an office. And that is what almost no office currently looks like. Most workplaces have the opposite culture. Don't say "I don't know." Don't admit a mistake. Don't ask for help. Don't disagree publicly. Don't show that you're upset. Don't bring problems without bringing solutions. Don't be too excited. Don't be too disappointed. Don't be too anything. And then the leader of that organization stands up at the annual retreat and gives a speech about how the company's #1 value is psychological safety. There is the gap. That space between what is said and what is lived is where everything quietly breaks down. Brown closes her chapter on leadership with what she calls the Daring Greatly Leadership Manifesto. It is a short statement from employees to their leaders. Listen to it the way you would listen if your team handed it to you tomorrow morning. We want to show up. We want to learn. We want to inspire. We are hardwired for connection, curiosity, and engagement. We crave purpose, and we have a deep desire to create and contribute. We want to take risks, embrace our vulnerabilities, and be courageous. When learning and working are dehumanized, when you no longer see us, when you only see what we produce or how we perform, we disengage and turn away from the very things the world needs from us: our talent, our ideas, our passion. What we ask is that you engage with us, show up beside us, let yourself be seen, and dare greatly with us. That is the ask. It is what every person you lead is asking you, even if they will never say it out loud. They are not asking you to be perfect. They are asking you to be a real human being, to take off the armor, to admit when you don't know, to make space for them to do the same. Which brings us to the last and maybe most important place this entire book lands. Not at work, not in your relationships out there, but at home, with the people you are raising. Section 7. The Wholehearted Parent. Most parents I have ever met would give almost anything for a color-coded, foolproof handbook that answered every question they have about raising their kid. A book that told you exactly when to start sleep training, exactly how to handle the meltdown in the grocery store, exactly what to do when your 8-year-old comes home crying about being left out, exactly what to say to your 14-year-old when you find out she's been lying to you, exactly how to keep your 19-year-old from making the same mistakes you made. We want certainty. Of course we do. There is nothing on earth more uncertain than raising a child. So we go looking for the rules. We buy the books. We follow the experts. We adopt the methods. We try the systems. And then we lie awake at 3 in the morning, still wondering if we are getting it wrong. Brown's response to all of this, after years of researching parents and watching how children actually grow up, is gentle but firm. She says, the parenting handbook you are looking for does not exist, and the search for it is part of the problem. Here is why. The need for certainty in something as inherently uncertain as raising a child makes explicit how-to parenting strategies both seductive and dangerous, because certainty breeds absolutes. Absolutes breed intolerance, and intolerance breeds judgment. That is why parents are so brutal to one another. Have you noticed this? The breastfeeders judge the bottle feeders. The bottle feeders judge the breastfeeders. The working parents judge the stay-at-home parents. The stay-at-home parents judge the working parents. The strict ones judge the gentle ones. The gentle ones judge the strict ones. We are all, on some level, terrified that we are getting it wrong, and so we look for ways to convince ourselves that someone else is getting it wronger. Brown's reframe of the entire parenting conversation comes down to one question, and it is, in my opinion, the most important question in the whole book. The question is not, am I doing this right? The question is, am I the adult I want my child to grow up to be? Sit with that for a second, because that single shift changes everything. Stop asking what your kid should be doing. Stop asking what your kid should be learning. Stop asking what your kid should be eating, watching, wearing, becoming. Start asking what you are doing, what you are learning, what you are watching, wearing, becoming, because your children are not, in the deepest sense, learning from the words you say to them. They are learning from the human being you actually are when no one in the world is watching except them. Brown's research is clear on this. Who we are and how we engage with the world are far stronger predictors of how our children turn out than anything we know about parenting strategies. If you want your kids to be brave, you have to be brave. Not lecture them about bravery. Be brave in front of them, where they can see it. If you want your kids to be honest, you have to be honest, where they can see you, in the small moments, when honesty actually costs you something. If you want your kids to be vulnerable, to be able to say, I am scared, I am sad, I made a mistake, I need help, you have to be willing to say those things first, to them, out loud, in front of them. Most of us were not raised by parents who modeled this. Most of us were raised by parents who were doing the best they could with the tools they had, but who had been taught that admitting weakness in front of their kids would somehow weaken the kids. So they hid. They performed having it all together. They never let us see them struggle, and we absorbed something from that. We absorbed the idea that to be a real adult is to never not know, to never be uncertain, to never need anyone, to always have the answer. Brown wants us to break that pattern, to raise children who are not afraid of being human. And the only way to do that is to stop being afraid of being human in front of them. There is one more idea here I want every parent, actually every person who has any relationship with a child, to hear. It is about the difference between fitting in and belonging. Most kids spend their entire adolescence trying to fit in. They watch the room, figure out what people want them to be, and rearrange themselves until they pass the test. They wear what the popular kids wear. They like what the popular kids like. They laugh at the jokes they don't think are funny. They hide the parts of themselves that don't match. Brown writes that fitting in is the great misery of childhood and adolescence. Because fitting in is the opposite of belonging. Fitting in is assessing a situation and becoming who you need to be accepted. Belonging is being who you are. Fitting in requires you to abandon yourself. Belonging requires you to bring yourself. The work of a wholehearted parent is to make sure that home is a place where their child belongs. Not because the child performs well, not because the child is good, not because the child is what the parent wants them to be, but simply because the child exists and is loved exactly as they are. Brown asks parents, does your child have at least one place in their life where they can show up exactly as they are, with no editing, and be loved? If the answer is yes, you have given them the single most protective thing you can ever give a human being. If the answer is no, you have your work to do. One last passage from the book. Brown closes the whole thing with this, and there is a reason she does, because nothing else she could have written would have landed the message more cleanly than these words. There is a children's book from 1922 called The Velveteen Rabbit. Some of you grew up with it. Some of you have never read it. The story is about a stuffed rabbit who wants to become real. Early in the book, the rabbit has a conversation with another, older toy, a skin horse who has been in the nursery far longer. The rabbit asks the skin horse what real means, and here is what the skin horse says. "Real isn't how you are made," said the skin horse. "It's a thing that happens to you. When a child loves you for a long, long time, not just to play with, but really loves you, then you become real." "Does it hurt?" asked the rabbit. "Sometimes," said the skin horse, for he was always truthful. "When you are real, you don't mind being hurt." "Does it happen all at once, like being wound up?" he asked, "or bit by bit?" "It doesn't happen all at once," said the skin horse. "You become. It takes a long time. That's why it doesn't often happen to people who break easily, or have sharp edges, or who have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off, and your eyes drop out, and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all, because once you are real, you can't be ugly except to people who don't understand. That is what wholehearted living actually looks like. By the time you are real, you are shabby, you have been loved on, you have scars, you have lost some hair. You are not flawless and you are not bulletproof, but you have been loved, and you are real. And that is the whole point of this book. Let's pull this together. After everything Brown's research has uncovered, there are a handful of ideas worth carrying out of this video and into the rest of your life. If anything in here has stayed with you, these are the lines I want you to leave with. 1. Vulnerability is not weakness. Vulnerability is the most accurate measure of courage you have. Every meaningful thing you have ever done, every relationship that mattered, every risk that paid off, every honest conversation that changed something, was vulnerable. Every meaningful thing you will ever do will be vulnerable too. If you are waiting until you feel certain before you act, you are waiting for a feeling that does not exist. Act anyway. 2. The opposite of scarcity is not abundance, it is enough. You do not need more. You do not need to be more. You need to recognize that in this exact moment, with all your imperfections and unfinished projects and unanswered questions, you are already enough. Wholehearted living is not a destination you arrive at when the circumstances finally line up. It is a daily practice of choosing to believe what scarcity culture is constantly trying to talk you out of. 3. Shame loses power when you speak it. Secrecy, silence, and judgment are what keep shame alive. The thing you have been hiding, the moment you keep replaying, the version of yourself you are afraid people will see, share it with one trusted person who has earned the right to hear it. Just one. Watch what happens. Shame cannot survive empathy. 4. You cannot selectively numb. The wine that takes the edge off the bad day also dulls the joy of the good day. The scrolling that distracts you from anxiety also distracts you from the people in front of you. The busyness that protects you from grief also protects you from gratitude. If you want your life to feel more alive, you have to be willing to feel more of everything, including the hard parts. 5. Stop rehearsing tragedy. The next time you are flooded with love or joy and your mind tries to flash to disaster, name it, out loud or in your head however you can. I am grateful for this moment. Gratitude is not a feeling that arrives by accident. It is a practice you build, one small reframe at a time, and it is the only thing strong enough to interrupt the foreboding joy pattern before it robs you of another moment you will never get back. 6. Perfectionism is not ambition. It is the 20-ton shield you are dragging behind you because somewhere along the way, you decided that the only way to keep from being hurt was to never let anyone see anything imperfect about you. It is not working. The shield is what is keeping you exhausted, isolated, and afraid to try the things you most want to try. Make something imperfect this week. Send it, show it, share it, and see who actually shows up. 7. Make the wallet list. Decide right now whose opinion of you actually counts. Maybe it's one person, maybe two, Maybe a handful of stretch mark friends who have known you long enough to have scars from the connection. Write the names down, carry the list, and the next time the strangers on the internet, or the colleagues who never tried what you are trying, or the family members who have never risked anything start telling you who you are, pull out the list, read the names, remember whose voice you have earned. 8. If you are raising a child, or have any influence on a child's life at all, stop asking whether you are doing this right. Start asking whether you are the adult you want them to grow up to be. Because they are not learning from the words on your mouth. They are learning from the human being you are when you think no one is watching. Be the adult, wear less armor, speak the truth, cry when you need to, apologize when you should, ask for help out loud, and let them see you do it. That is the whole book. That is everything Brené Brown has been trying to tell us in over a decade of research and a lifetime of getting it wrong and then getting it right again. So let me come back to where we started. A parent standing over a sleeping child, flooded with love, bracing for catastrophe, rehearsing the tragedy that has not happened in a futile attempt to beat vulnerability to the punch. If that was you, if some part of this video felt uncomfortably specific, Brown wants you to know there is another way to live. The way is not to feel less. The way is not to brace harder. The way is to soften into the moment in front of you, to say out loud or in your head, I am grateful for this. To feel the love all the way through, even knowing it cannot last forever, because it never could. And that has never been the point. So here's the question I want to leave you with. Not what did you think of the video? Something more important. Where in your life are you sitting in the bleachers right now? What is the conversation, the risk, the offer, the apology, the show of love that you have been watching from a safe distance because the arena terrifies you? Sit with that question for the rest of the day. And if any of this is speaking to you, I want to genuinely recommend you pick up Daring Greatly. There is so much more in the book than I could fit into 1 hour. There are full chapters on shame in education, on the disengagement divide in workplaces, on the wholehearted families, on the small daily practices that build shame resilience. The Amazon and Audible links are in the description below, and the audiobook is narrated by Brené Brown herself, which, if you have ever heard her speak, makes a real difference. And if you found this useful, subscribe to the channel. We do this every week. 1 book, 1 full deep dive, no shortcuts. The next one is coming, and I would love for you to be here when it drops. Until then, dare greatly. I will see you on the next one.